I bet you haven't heard the story about the Puerto Rican slave who was separated from his family but was later reunited with them. My name is Andre, and I help people to discover their history. I had been doing this research years ago when I discovered these records. There's a lot of details that aren't there, well, because, slavery. But I was able to put together what we do know and piece together a little bit of this story. This is the story of Jose Monserrate Rivera. It actually starts with Jose Monserrate's mother, a black woman named Felipa. She was enslaved in Arecibo when Puerto Rico was still a colony of Spain. She gave birth to Monserrate sometime between 1839 and 1844. She also had two other children, a daughter named Facunda and a son named Cosme. An aspect of slavery that you need to know. Slaves were natally alienated. As legal commodities, Felipa and her children did not have the same rights as free people who could claim one another. Dispossession is what they had. Felipa could have children, but those children would never be hers. They belonged to her enslavers. They could never claim kinship with one another and have it be respected and recognized and honored as it was for free people who were within civil society. They were, in essence, socially dead. And because of this, there was always a possibility of separation. And this is exactly what happened. It isn't known if Felipa died, but between 1868 and 1872, we know that her three children, Facunda, Cosme, and Monserrate, were enslaved and separated in different areas of northern Puerto Rico. Facunda went to the barrio of Domingo Ruiz as the personal servant to the wife of Arecibo's wealthiest sugar barons. She was a white woman from St. Thomas named Ana Maria Romero Austasen de Storer. Facunda herself was separated from her 9-year-old son, a boy named Bernardo. He went to go labor on the Hacienda Cambalache, one of the sugar plantations owned by Ana Maria's husband, a white Puerto Rican named Charles Frederick Storer. Cosme went to the barrio of Carreras and was owned by the Cordova family. And Monserrate became the property of a white Spaniard from the Canary Islands, owned by a man named Jose Domingo Abreu Reyes. Abreu took him to the barrio of Carrizales in the municipality of Atillo, where he was working as one of 8 slaves on his property. After rebellious slaves eroding the slave system from within, as well as pressure from abolitionists, Spain formally abolished slavery in Puerto Rico on March 22, 1873. But this did not truly mean freedom. A couple things that you need to know about the afterlife of slavery in Puerto Rico for people like Monserrate and other formerly enslaved people. Regulations were passed that forced these formerly enslaved people to enter into labor contracts for 3 years. Full political rights were withheld from them for 6 more years. In the continuation of extracting labor from them, there was a legal loophole that the formerly enslaved found, and they used to their benefit. They could choose who they had contracts with, and they could terminate those contracts. And this led to movement. As former enslavers continued subjugating the now free population, the libertos, or the freed people, started to demand wages as free laborers. They wanted to be paid according to their skill and value. And when those in authority would not listen to their demands, they would go ahead and remove themselves from that contract and relocate themselves. This set in motion for the governor to institutionalize surveillance and control the formerly enslaved by restricting their movement. The formerly enslaved could no longer travel freely. They had to ask permission from those in authority if they can receive a pass in order to enter into other municipalities. They were monitored to make sure that they were fulfilling their end of the contract that they were forced to do. They wanted them to stay put so they can continue extracting labor from them. As the white elite in Puerto Rico continued to try to control them, the now free population in Puerto Rico continued to define the contours of their own freedom. They continued relocating themselves, removing themselves from anything that confined them, and went to other places. They exercised their freedom by securing labor according to how they saw fit. They began owning this freedom so much that the elite began to call them lazy vagrants, drifters without fixed residence, calling them the repository of idleness and vice, regarding them as the ignorant, despicable, unsteady, undisciplined authors of the destruction of their own homeland. Even after 3 years of forced labor contracts were up, the governor institutionalized vagrancy laws to continue controlling the new population of freed people. all because the freed people did not want to stay on sites of subjugation. This is the world that Monserrate entered into as a free person in 1873. Movement became a theme of his life until the very end. He became an onalero, an unproperty day laborer who secured employment contracts with whoever he wanted, wherever he wanted. The violence of slavery had cut him off from the ability to learn how to read and write and relegated him to agricultural work. And now that freedom looked like elites continuing their subjugation of people like Monserrate, Monserrate decided to utilize those skills as best as he could in order to survive. And Monserrate embraced movement to make this happen. When 3 years of forced contracts were up and coffee was booming in the mountains of Puerto Rico, Monserrate left Arecibo for Lares. He negotiated a contract there. He married. He had a baby girl that he named Felipa after his mother. But sadly, he became a single father and widower when his wife died shortly after giving birth to their daughter. He continued working to take care of his daughter, eventually remarrying a few years later, and had 7 more children. He'd take his family to live in parts of Lares, Camuy, Utuado, and Atillo, working on other people's lands while his wife worked as a domestic in other people's homes. Life in slavery's supposed end was difficult for the unschooled hornalero in El Campo. Monserrate and his family did not have access to medical care, and food was dependent upon income since they did not own their own land to be able to grow their own food on. In 1895, Monserrate experienced loss again with the death of his young wife due to gastric ulceration and poor diet. Once again, Monserrate was a single father, this time of 8 children, all under the age of 16. And he continued moving. He left Utuado with his children and he went to Arecibo, the land of his birth. He remarried a 3rd time and became a stepfather to his new wife's son, a child she had from a previous relationship. The blended family moved to Manatí briefly, but eventually settled back in Arecibo. It seems it was during this time that Monserrate was reunited with his long-lost family. The records aren't clear about how, but it seems that Monserrate found his sister Facunda living in the barrio of Ato Abajo, still working as a domestic. Unfortunately, she had lost her only son Bernardo at the young age of 25 due to malaria. One thing is clear, Monserrate remained close to his sister Facunda to the remainder of her days, being the one to declare her death and give the civil officer information about her life. Another record reveals that his new brother-in-law was friends with his brother Cosme. Cosme had settled down in Utuado, where he earned enough money in agriculture to purchase a farm where he took care of his family. Perhaps it was his new brother-in-law who was the one who reunited Cosme with Monserrate. Or maybe Facunda had known where Cosme was and had told Monserrate where he was. Or maybe Monserrate found him while living in Utuado. Unfortunately, we don't know the details. On the 31st anniversary of slavery's abolishment in Puerto Rico, Monserrate experienced loss again with the death of his wife. She had contracted malaria days after giving birth to their daughter. For the 3rd time, Monserrate was again a widower, this time having 10 children dependent upon him. Tragedy continued 10 months later when his infant daughter died of bronchial pneumonia. And 3 weeks later, his 6-year-old stepson died of hookworm infection in his intestines. These tragic losses again underscores the violence of slavery's afterlife shaping access to healthcare. But Monserrate continued employing himself, working to take care of his family. Years of this continued and decades of toiling and loss began to take a toll on Monserrate. In his 60s, his health began to decline and he eventually had to stop working. After years of taking care of his family, he needed his family to take care of him. But even in his old age, movement continued being a theme in his life. He lived in the homes of his adult children, as they were now with families of their own. And in his late 70s, early 80s, he left Arecibo for the last time to live with his daughter Felipa in Atillo. And it was in her home that he drew his last breath. On November 14th, 1924, the formerly enslaved man who used movement to exercise his freedom passed away. The violence of slavery and its supposed end were the terrain in which Jose Monserrate Rivera lived his whole life, from birth to death. His life was shaped by this violence. From losing wives and children to systematically being oppressed, Monserrate tried his best to survive by using the skills he had to take care of his family. He knew what it was like to have his family once taken away from him. He had once been separated from his siblings, but it seems in their attempts to survive, as movement was being shamed and demonized, that it was movement that helped reunite them.